Warm welcome, audience. What's time there from where you're watching it? Let us step together into the shadowed mists of legend and the torchlight of history. For today we begin a long journey into the truth about the Black Knight, legends versus reality. In the medieval world, a time when fear and faith walked hand in hand, people lived in constant awe of shadows. The forests were deep and filled with dangers, the castles were tall but never impenetrable, and war was a constant drumbeat in the background of daily life. Among the countless figures who emerged from this age of iron and blood, few carried the same mixture of terror and fascination as the mysterious Black Knight. He was spoken of not as a man of flesh and bone, but as a legend and omen, a force that belonged more to myth than to history. People huddled around fires in cottages, travellers whispered in roadside inns, and even noblemen in their great halls leaned forward when tales of the Black Knight were spoken, for everyone wanted to know if such a figure truly walked among them. The Black Knight was never introduced with a name. He bore no crest, carried no banner, and claimed no allegiance. This was a violation of everything the knightly code stood for. In those days, identity was everything. Shields were painted with lions, dragons, crosses, or fleurs-de-lis, so that even in the chaos of battle a knight could be known by his colors. To fight without heraldry was to erase one's self from history, to live as a shadow in a world obsessed with recognition. And yet, that is precisely what gave the Black Knight his dreadful aura. He was nameless, faceless, and therefore unstoppable. When he rode into stories, clad head to toe in black steel, visor never lifted, he became not merely a man, but a question. Who is he and why does he fight? The earliest versions of the Black Knight did not come from historical chronicles, but from romances, the Arthurian legends, sung by troubadours and written by poets who shaped the Middle Ages imagination. In those tales, the Black Knight was often the challenger on the road, standing at a bridge or crossroads to test wandering heroes. To Sir Lancelot or Sir Gareth, he was the nameless obstacle, the trial of strength and courage before glory could be claimed. These literary knights were not villains alone, they were trials, embodiments of doubt, fear, or temptation. For the noble audience who listened in candlelit courts, the Black Knight became a symbol of the unknown darkness that must be faced if honor is to shine. But slowly, stories blurred into rumors. Knights in tournaments began to play with anonymity. Imagine a grand festival, banners snapping in the wind, trumpets blaring, the crowd roaring as knights thundered into the lists. The air would be filled with color bright shields, gleaming lances, embroidered surcoats, yet suddenly, from the stables, a rider would emerge clad in nothing but black. No colors, no marks, only steel as dark as the night sky. Gasps would ripple through the crowd. Who is he? Peasants would ask. Is he a king in disguise? A traitor! A ghost returned from the grave. The knight would tilt his visor, say nothing, and charge into combat. Victory or defeat mattered less than the mystery, for the image had already imprinted itself upon the minds of those who watched. And thus reality began feeding the myth. Outside the tourney fields, darker figures roamed. Mercenaries, often poor knights without land, fought for coin in endless wars across Europe. Many abandoned heraldry altogether, wearing plain armor sometimes blackened by soot, sometimes painted to intimidate. They owed loyalty to no king, only to gold, and their violence was notorious. Such men, faceless and ruthless, may have been the living roots of the Black Knight's legend. Tales grew that these warriors appeared like phantoms on battlefields, fought savagely, and disappeared into smoke, leaving no name behind. For a peasant who saw such a rider, was it not easier to call him the Black Knight, a being of myth rather than mere man? Even among nobles, certain figures contributed to the myth. In Scotland, Sir James Douglas earned the title, the Black Douglas, for his merciless campaigns against the English, his reputation so fearsome that mothers threatened unruly children with his name. Elsewhere, rumors surrounded rogue knights who refused their king's summons, living as rebels in black armor, striking fear into lords who dared cross them. Every story, rumor, and exaggeration added layers to the legend, until the Black Knight was no longer tied to one place, one man, or one moment in time. He had become an archetype, an eternal presence haunting the imagination of Europe. Why did people cling to him so? Because the Black Knight represented the unknown, and the unknown is always powerful. In a world where knights were expected to be shining examples of faith and loyalty, the Black Knight was the outsider, the renegade, the reminder that order could crumble and that darkness could ride at any moment. To some, he was a villain, to others, a secret hero, perhaps hiding his identity for noble reasons. His facelessness allowed him to be anything the story required: monster, challenger, rebel, or savior. That is why the Black Knight lives on, not in dusty chronicles, but in the firelit imagination of humanity. Thus, Chapter 1 opens not with certainty, but with mystery. We do not meet the Black Knight as one man, but as a shadow carried by countless voices across time. He is born of literature, nurtured by rumor and sustained by spectacle. He is, in essence, the perfect legend because no matter how much we seek his truth, his visor never lifts, and behind it, we only find ourselves staring into darkness. The tale has begun, and from here we will chase both myth and history, searching the valleys of battlefields and the pages of forgotten manuscripts, to answer the eternal question, was the Black Knight real, or was he always just a phantom of human imagination? The legend of the Black Knight did not remain locked within the walls of a single castle, nor did it belong to one country alone. Like smoke from a fire carried by the wind, it drifted across Europe, reshaped each time it was told. In France, minstrels sang of him as a ghostly challenger who haunted lonely bridges at dusk, demanding that all who passed face him in single combat. In England, he became entwined with the Arthurian romances, standing as the faceless adversary that tested the valor of noble knights sworn to Camelot. In the German lands, ballads told of him as a dark avenger, cloaked in black steel, rising when treachery went, unanswered by the weak hands of lords, though every tongue described him differently. One thing remained constant: he was always the knight without a name, a warrior armored in black, silent, secretive, and terrifyingly unknown. This variety of tales tells us much about the minds of medieval people. Knights were not ordinary soldiers. They were symbols of order, honor, and chivalry, walking representatives of the values their world held dear. A knight carried not only his sword, but also his family's crest, his lineage, and the reputation of his house. He was supposed to be recognized in battle, to fight openly with honor and loyalty. To abandon heraldry was to abandon identity. It was to erase oneself from history. And yet, the Black Knight did exactly that. He wore no colors, bore no crest, claimed no lord. He was the very contradiction of knighthood, a man who lived within its armor but rejected its laws. This contradiction fascinated people, for it forced them to confront a question: could a knight be noble without name? Or was he simply a rebel disguised in honor's armor? At tournaments, this contradiction often came to life before thousands of eager eyes. Imagine the scene: a great field lined with banners snapping in the wind, the royal stands filled with lords and ladies in their richest garments, peasants pressed together at the edges waiting to see. Knights crash against one another with lances. The herald announces the names of challengers, each knight proudly carrying a shield painted with lions, falcons, or crosses, symbols of their houses. The crowd cheers, voices rising like a storm. Then, suddenly, another knight emerges, not dressed in brilliant colors, but in a suit of armor black as midnight. His shield is empty, his surcoat unmarked, his visor shut tight. A hush falls over the crowd. Who dares to ride without a name? Is it a king disguising himself to test his warriors? A disgraced noble seeking revenge? Or perhaps a phantom summoned from another world? No answer comes. The knight rides in silence, lowers his lance, and charges. When such knights won, the drama only deepened. Some lifted their visors and revealed themselves as famous lords playing. At disguise, the crowd erupted in astonishment, delighted at the trick. But others refused to reveal their identity, leaving the field as silently as they had entered. These moments planted the seeds of myth. For mystery always takes deeper root than certainty. The faceless knight became more than a competitor. He became a legend, a story retold long after the dust of the tournament had settled. Yet the Black Knight was not confined to jousts and festivals. In the real wars of Europe, darker figures walked the land. Mercenaries, men who sold their swords for coin, often abandoned heraldry altogether. They were not bound by honor or lineage. Their loyalty belonged only to whoever paid the most, and their ruthlessness was feared in every village. Their armor, sometimes blackened by smoke and soot, made them appear like shadows moving across battlefields. To peasants who glimpsed such figures, the sight must have been chilling faceless warriors who rode in, plundered, and vanished. How easy it was for frightened villagers to connect these mercenaries to the stories of the Black Knight, to believe that legend had taken flesh before their very eyes. Certain historical figures also contributed to the myth. One of the most feared was Sir James Douglas of Scotland, remembered as the Black Douglas. His name alone was enough to terrify English soldiers and civilians, who whispered it like a curse. Mothers told their children, "If you do not behave, the Black Douglas will come for you." Though he was not the Black Knight of legend, his dark reputation merged with the archetype, proving how powerful the image of a ruthless, black-armored warrior could be. Over time, the Black Knight became a vessel into which every culture poured its fears and fascinations. For nobles, he was the spectre of rebellion, the reminder that even among their own class, a knight could choose anonymity and defiance. For common folk, he was the embodiment of the unknown, the fear that beneath every visor might hide a stranger with no loyalty to protect them. For poets and storytellers, he was the perfect character, an empty mask upon which they could project danger, trial, or even hidden nobility. The beauty of the Black Knight was his mystery. Because he had no identity, he could be shaped into whatever story demanded. And this is why the figure endured. Knights in shining armor were symbols of order, loyalty, and faith, but the Black Knight was the shadow that made their light meaningful. He reminded people that darkness always lingered beyond the edge of order, that not every warrior rode for a king, and that secrecy itself could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. His story endured because people needed it. They needed a figure to embody their fear of the unknown, their fascination with secrecy, and their belief that some warriors fought for causes hidden from mortal eyes. Thus, chapter 2 deepens the legend, showing us not a single man, but a shifting figure, born anew in each land and tale. He was a French ghost, an English challenger, a German avenger, a Scottish terror. He was everywhere and nowhere, all things and nothing. And so the question sharpened with every retelling. Was the Black Knight ever real, or is he forever a shadow stitched together from rumor, fear, and imagination? The legend of the Black Knight did not simply live in words, it breathed in the hearts of the people, who repeated it, shaping itself with every whisper, every firelit tale, every passing of rumor from one village to another. To imagine him, one must step into the world that gave birth to his story. It was not a quiet or gentle world. It was a world where the nights were long and heavy with silence, broken only by the howl of wolves or the creak of trees swaying in the wind. A world where roads were dangerous, where travelers rode with fear in their chests, glancing over their shoulders at the shadows that seemed to follow them. In such a world, the figure of a knight in black armor, faceless and nameless, became more than an invention, it became a presence. One people felt might be waiting just beyond the bend of the road. Chroniclers wrote of knights who competed in tournaments, without banners, hiding their names and covering their shields with plain colors. For the common people who watched from behind fences, these figures were enthralling. They seemed to come from nowhere, to ride with an aura of secrecy, to fight with ferocity, and then to vanish again without revealing who they were. Every time a knight fought in disguise, he fed the legend. Some revealed themselves later great lords who wished to prove their valor, without the weight of reputation. Others, however, never lifted their visors. They won, or they lost, and then they disappeared into the crowd, to the watching villagers. This mystery became irresistible. Was this one of the Black Knights of rumor? Was he the same rider who haunted the forests? Or yet another faceless challenger cloaked in darkness in the countryside? The tales were darker. Mercenaries, hardened by endless wars, often wore unadorned armor. Their suits were blackened by ash or oil, either from use or to strike fear into their enemies. To a farmer who had never seen the pageantry of noble knights, a band of such soldiers could look like a horde of black knights, silent, unmarked, merciless. They came without heraldry, demanded food and coin, and left fields trampled. To peasants, the line between reality and legend blurred. The faceless knight became not only a figure of tournaments and poems, but a terrifying possibility lurking behind every raid. And there was symbolism, too, that made the legend stronger. In medieval thought, colors were never empty, they carried weight. White was purity, red was valor, gold was nobility, but black was grief, death, the absence of light. A knight dressed in black became not just a man, but a message. He stood apart from the glittering colors of heraldry, apart from the rules of the chivalric code. He was the shadow on the edge of the battlefield, the storm that rolled in from nowhere, the punishment for those who trusted too much in honor and forgot the cruelty of reality. Not all tales painted him as a villain. Some romances spoke of him as a man of sorrow, a noble heart cursed or mourning. His black armor a reflection of grief that could not be spoken. In those versions, he fought not for coin or cruelty, but for honor lost or love dead. The faceless knight in black could thus become either a symbol of menace or a figure of tragic dignity. Each storyteller chose which mask to place upon him, but the mystery remained intact. Because he had no name, no fixed identity, this shifting figure made him impossible to pin down. He could appear in French poetry as a supernatural avenger, in English ballads as a challenger of Arthur's knights, in German tales as a mercenary killer, in whispered stories as a cursed soul. Each time he appeared, he was changed, reshaped by the imagination of the people who spoke of him. Yet at his core, he remained the same, a knight without colors, a warrior without a name. His face hidden by steel, his purpose uncertain. And so the Black Knight grew larger with every telling. He became a mirror of the age itself, an age where war and faith, fear and hope, shadow and light, constantly clashed. When people spoke of him, they were not only telling a story of one man, they were giving form to their own fears and longings. They were admitting that in the heart of their world, there was always a shadow that could not be fully explained. The story of the Black Knight deepened as the Middle Ages entered their most turbulent centuries. Europe was not a peaceful land. It was a patchwork of kingdoms, principalities, duchies, and baronies, each fighting to hold power. The clash of steel was as common as the ringing of church bells, and the ground itself seemed stained by endless battles. Out of this chaos, the figure of the Black Knight became even more believable. For what better time could such a shadowy warrior exist than in an age where knights lived and died almost daily upon the field? Battlefields of the 14th and 15th centuries were grim places. Gone was much of the shining romance that courtly poets liked to imagine. What remained was mud, blood, and smoke. The chivalric code that promised honor and mercy often broke beneath the weight of survival. Men who once swore loyalty to a king could change sides, fight for pay, or carve out their own power. In such a world, a knight who wore no colors and swore to no lord was no impossibility. He was almost expected. He was the living embodiment of betrayal and secrecy, the nameless warrior who could appear on any side of the battlefield. Chronicles tell us of soldiers who blackened their armor, not only to preserve the metal, but to strike terror in the hearts of their enemies. Against the gleam of polished steel and the brightness of painted shields, black was unnatural, an omen. Imagine the sight in the mist of morning when armies stood in formation. Banners fluttering in the wind, one figure rode forth, covered from head to toe in darkness. No crest, no colors, no words, only silence and the gleam of a black helm. To those watching, whether friend or foe, the figure seemed less like a man and more like a spirit conjured out of fear. And fear, in medieval times, was as much a weapon as any sword. Rumors spread faster than arrows flew. Soldiers believed that certain knights were protected by demons, that their armor could not be pierced, that their swords were cursed. In such fertile ground, the Black Knight legend grew stronger with every telling. Was he a mercenary, hardened by countless battles? Was he a disgraced noble, stripped of heraldry, returning to the field in defiance? Or was he something darker, a ghost of war, doomed to ride forever where men spilled blood? No answer came, and so the mystery only expanded. Villages near battlefields often reported sightings of such figures long after armies had marched away. Farmers ploughing fields where men had once fallen swore that at dusk They saw a rider dressed in black armor moving along the horizon, silent, watchful. Some claimed he was searching for souls of the dead. Others believed he was protecting the battlefield itself, as if bound to the place where violence had soaked the ground. Whether these were tricks of the eye, wandering mercenaries, or simply the power of suggestion, the tales gave the Black Knight a spectral quality. He was no longer just a competitor at tournaments, or a faceless soldier. He was becoming a myth that haunted the very earth. Religious writers made use of his image. For some monks, the Black Knight represented the devil's champion, the antithesis of the white-clad Knight of Christ. His dark armor symbolized pride, secrecy, and rebellion against God's order. Yet others used him as a lesson of humility. They described him as a noble who had chosen to hide his identity, not for vanity, but for penance. In their sermons, the Black Knight fought as a warning or as an example, depending on how the preacher wished to move his flock. Thus, even in the church, he found a place, his shadow stretching from battlefield to pulpit. But beyond all allegory, there was something primal in the fascination. He inspired. The faceless warrior strikes a nerve in every age, for the hidden enemy is always more terrifying than the known. To fight a knight whose crest you recognize is to fight a man with family, with history, with ties to the world. To fight a knight who has no name, who hides behind black steel, is to fight the unknown itself. And in the medieval world, the unknown was the most powerful force of all. It was death, it was sin, it was eternity. The Black Knight therefore became a bridge between the real and the imagined. He could be seen on the tournament field. He could be glimpsed in the mist of battle. He could be whispered about in monasteries. He could be feared by peasants in lonely valleys. And each place he appeared, he changed slightly, taking on the fears of those who spoke of him. In this way, he was less a single man and more an echo, a reflection of everything people feared and wondered about the hidden side of knighthood. And so, by the late Middle Ages, the Black Knight was no longer merely a figure of curiosity. He was a presence embedded in the culture, half real, half dream. He had become a legend strong enough to live without proof, powerful enough to walk in the minds of those who never even saw him. He was, in every sense, the knight who stood apart, who refused to be defined, who lingered forever in the shadows. As the legend of the Black Knight continued to grow, it began to take on a life of its own, stretching far beyond the tournaments and battlefields, where such a figure might have once been glimpsed. By the late medieval period, storytellers, poets, and chroniclers were no longer speaking only of soldiers in blackened armor. They were painting him as something greater, something almost timeless. In their words, the Black Knight became more than man or soldier. He became symbol, myth, and mystery combined. Tales began to describe him not only as a challenger, but as a judge. In some regions, he appeared suddenly to confront knights accused of dishonor, riding into a feast or a gathering, to call out their shame. These stories show him as a figure of justice, a silent avenger who stood apart from the corruption of courts and kings. His black armor became not a sign of villainy, but of impartiality, a mask that allowed him to punish betrayal without favor or fear. To audiences who lived under lords often more concerned with wealth than with justice, such a figure was deeply appealing. The nameless knight, they believed, could be the champion they needed, one who fought not for power but for truth. Yet in other tales, the Black Knight was darker. Some poets whispered that he was cursed, doomed to fight forever, never revealing his face because beneath the visor lay not flesh but shadow. In these stories, no lance could unhorse him, no sword could pierce him, and no prayer could drive him away. He was the ghost of war itself, the embodiment of bloodshed, destined to appear wherever men fought and to vanish when the fields fell silent. In this form, the Black Knight was not hero but warning, a grim reminder that war leaves behind spirits that never rest. Travelers' accounts added to the legend. Pilgrims on the road to shrines told of encountering a rider cloaked in black, who asked them riddles or demanded proof of their faith before allowing them to pass. Merchants crossing through borderlands claimed to have been spared by a faceless knight when bandits attacked, as though the Black Knight himself had ridden out of the shadows to deliver them. Were these chance encounters with mercenaries or armed escorts mistaken for myth? Perhaps. But each tale added another thread to the fabric of his story. weaving him deeper into the imagination of Europe. The spread of the legend can also be traced through literature in Arthurian romances. The Black Knight often appeared as a mysterious challenger to the knights of the Round Table. He tested their strength, their courage, and sometimes their humility. Sometimes he was defeated and revealed to be a great lord in disguise. Other times, he remained unknown, riding away without explanation. To audiences, this mixture of mystery and challenge made him irresistible. He was not the villain to be slain, nor the hero to be praised. He was the shadow against which heroes defined themselves. Meanwhile, in folk ballads sung in taverns and market squares, the Black Knight took on yet another shape. There, he was often cast as the outlaw, a rogue knight who defied kings and bishops alike, carving out his own path beyond the reach of law. To the common people, weary of taxes and wars, such a figure was not frightening but thrilling. He was the knight who belonged to no lord, the warrior who owed no allegiance, the one who fought on his own terms. Whether he robbed the rich or punished the wicked, he became, in song, a symbol of rebellion, as dangerous as he was admired. What made the Black Knight so powerful a legend was precisely this adaptability. He was never bound to one single story, one single meaning. He could be hero, villain, ghost, avenger, outlaw, or judge. He could haunt forests, tournaments, or battlefields. He could ride for vengeance or for justice. And because he had no name, no crest, no history, no one could ever say for certain who he truly was. That mystery gave him life, allowed him to move freely from tale to tale, generation to generation, never growing old, never fading away. By the 15th century, the Black Knight was no longer just a rumor. He was a figure of culture, deeply rooted in imagination. He stood as the shadow of knighthood itself, the part of the knightly world that was hidden, feared, and unspoken. While kings and lords celebrated their banners and colors, while chroniclers praised noble warriors, the people remembered the one knight who stood apart, the one who had no color, no lord, no name. And so the Black Knight endured, faceless, nameless, unclaimed, forever lingering on the edge of history and legend. The further the Middle Ages advanced, the more the Black Knight became a figure not bound by place or time. He was no longer a rumor tied to one battlefield, one tournament, or one lord's story. He was everywhere and nowhere, a figure who could be invoked whenever men spoke of secrecy, betrayal, or strange encounters upon the road. To understand how this happened, one must remember that medieval people lived in a world where stories traveled faster than certainty. A rumor whispered in a village could, within months, find its way into the halls of a king, transformed and magnified along the way. The Black Knight was born in just such whispers, his shadow stretching wider with every retelling. Travelers often carried the legend with them. A merchant leaving London might recount a tale he heard in a French tavern, and by the time he reached Bruges the tale had changed. The Black Knight was no longer a disguised nobleman, but a ghostly rider who appeared after sunset. A pilgrim who passed through a German monastery might hear monks describe him as a warning against pride, while in Italian cities the same pilgrim might later hear him praised as a noble figure of sorrow and penance. No matter where one went, the Black Knight could be found reshaped, retold, yet always recognizable, faceless, nameless, cloaked in black. In this way, the Black Knight began to move beyond oral tales and enter written tradition. Manuscripts of romances, copied carefully by monks or professional scribes, sometimes featured episodes of mysterious knights dressed all in black. To the noble readers of these texts, the figure was a thrilling archetype. He represented the unknown challenge, the dark rival, the test of courage. Knights at court might laugh at such stories, yet when a stranger appeared at a tournament, visor closed and shield painted black, the laughter often turned into speculation. The boundary between fiction and reality blurred easily in an age when records were scarce and imagination plentiful. The fascination with the Black Knight also reflected a deeper truth about medieval knighthood. For all its glitter and chivalry, the knightly world was filled with contradictions. Knights swore to serve God and king, yet many fought for gold or personal power. They were supposed to defend the weak, yet too often preyed upon them. They were praised for honor, but feared for their cruelty. The Black Knight embodied these contradictions. He was the knight stripped of pretense, the knight without colors, the knight who did not pretend to belong to noble ideals. To some, that made him terrifying. To others, it made him honest. Common folk often embraced this second view. In taverns, ballads were sung of a black knight who rode against corrupt lords, striking them down when justice failed. In some songs, he robbed rich travelers and gave spoils to the poor. Not unlike the later figure of Robin Hood in others, he protected maidens or avenged betrayed peasants. These tales transformed him into a folk hero, the people's knight. Nameless because he belonged to everyone, it is impossible to know whether such songs reflected truth or pure invention, but their existence shows how deeply he resonated with those who lived beneath the weight of noble power. Meanwhile, nobles themselves saw the figure differently. For them, the Black Knight was a rival to be feared. His lack of heraldry denied him a place in the carefully ordered hierarchy of knighthood. To fight him was to fight an opponent who defied the very rules of recognition. Knights who encountered mysterious rivals on the field sometimes described them with awe, even dread, for how could one claim victory over an enemy who had no name to disgrace and no family to shame? This unease only strengthened the Black Knight's place as a figure of legend. Religious voices added yet another layer. In sermons, the Black Knight was sometimes portrayed as temptation itself, a dark rider who challenged Christians on their journey of faith, testing their courage, humility, or devotion. Monks wrote allegories where the Black Knight symbolized sin, pride, or despair, while the White Knight represented virtue and purity. To hear these stories was to be reminded that every soul faced its own Black Knight, hidden in the shadows of the heart. In this way, the legend carried moral weight, offering both warning and lesson. And so, as the 15th century drew on, the Black Knight was no longer just one story among many. He had become a canvas upon which every fear, every hope, every contradiction of medieval life could be painted. To peasants, he was a symbol of rebellion or justice. To nobles, he was a rival without rules. To monks, he was a moral lesson. To poets, he was a mystery that no one could ever quite resolve. That was his power. Because he had no fixed identity, he could become anything. And because he could become anything, he could never fade away. By the time the Renaissance began to dawn, the Black Knight had already become more legend than memory. Yet the fascination with him did not weaken, it transformed, adapting to a changing world. Europe was moving slowly out of the medieval mindset, cities were rising, trade was flourishing, new philosophies were spreading, and yet the old stories clung tightly to the imagination of the people. The Black Knight was one of those stories. He could not be confined to the dusty pages of manuscripts or the smoky corners of taverns. Instead, he walked alongside people's fears and dreams, always reshaped to fit their time. It is in this period that the Black Knight began to appear in even more elaborate romances. Printed books and new inventions spreading across Europe carried tales of mysterious knights farther than ever before. Stories once limited to noble courts could now be read by merchants, townsfolk, and scholars. Among these tales were those of nameless knights clad in black, riding into tournaments to test champions, riding into battlefields to turn the tide, or riding into forests to challenge wandering heroes. Each retelling expanded his presence, making him not just a story of the past but a timeless figure, one who could reappear whenever the world needed him. One striking development of this period was the blending of superstition with allegory. For medieval people, the Black Knight had been both mystery and rumor, but for Renaissance audiences, he also became symbol. Writers described him as the shadow that follows every man, the hidden self, the darker side of human ambition. He was no longer just a figure on horseback, he was the embodiment of doubt, temptation, or vengeance. A knight might face him in a tale not just to test his sword but to test his soul. In this way, the Black Knight stepped across the boundary between folklore and philosophy, carrying with him a deeper weight than before. And yet, among common people, the simpler stories endured. Peasants and townsfolk still spoke of seeing him on lonely roads, appearing suddenly at twilight before vanishing into mist. Traders swore that black-armored riders sometimes escorted their wagons through dangerous passes, demanding no payment before disappearing without a trace. Farmers claimed that fields once soaked in blood were haunted by a silent knight who rode only under moonlight. These reports, whether born of imagination or real encounters with mercenaries, kept the legend alive, for to those who lived without certainty, it was always possible that the Black Knight might truly be out there. The nobility, however, gave the legend a different meaning. For them, the Black Knight came to represent a threat to order. Their world was built on names, titles, and heraldry, the careful display of banners and crests that showed loyalty and ancestry. To wear none of these was to defy the system itself. A knight without a crest was a knight without place, without obligation, and that unsettled the very foundations of noble identity. Thus, when nobles spoke of the Black Knight, they often did so with unease. He was not only a rival in arms, but a rival in meaning, a reminder that beneath the pageantry, knighthood could also be faceless, mercenary, and free. In the church, too, the Black Knight still had a role. Priests and preachers continued to use him as allegory. To some, he represented sin-black armor hiding the light of the soul, a knight who fought against the grace of God. To others, he represented penance, the soul who took upon itself the color of mourning until redemption was earned. This duality meant that the Black Knight could be both the enemy of salvation and the pilgrim of sorrow in both cases. His figure carried meaning far beyond the battlefield. The enduring power of the Black Knight in this period lay in his flexibility. He could appear as villain, as hero, as ghost, as symbol. He could serve peasants, nobles, or priests alike, for he had no fixed identity, and this lack of identity gave him immortality. While kings died and knights fell, the Black Knight remained faceless, nameless, untethered. He could belong to every land and every time, because he belonged to none. By the close of the 15th century, when new worlds were being discovered and new sciences were reshaping old beliefs, one might think that such a legend would fade. And yet, the Black Knight persisted. His image still haunted stories, still appeared in ballads, still lingered in whispers. He was too deeply woven into the human imagination to disappear. Where there was fear of the unknown, where there was longing for mystery, the Black Knight could always rise again. As the Renaissance advanced and the old medieval world began to crumble, the Black Knight refused to vanish with it. In fact, his legend seemed to grow even stronger in this era of transition. The people of Europe were now living between two worlds, the old with its feudal lords, crusading knights, and sacred traditions, and the new with its bustling cities, voyages across oceans, and the slow birth of modern science. But even as scholars debated philosophy and explorers mapped the globe, the shadow of the Black Knight still rode through their imaginations. For legends, unlike armies or kings, are not bound to the changes of time. In this age, he became more than rumor, he became literature. Printed books, circulating widely, carried romances in which the Black Knight was often cast as the great challenger. Some stories described him riding into tournaments to unseat the most famous knights, defeating them one by one until the hero of the tale alone could stand against him. Others showed him wandering through enchanted forests, guarding bridges or blocking passes, demanding combat as the price of passage. He was always faceless, always mysterious, always leaving the question unanswered. Who was he? But the Renaissance mind did not stop at entertainment. Writers and philosophers gave the Black Knight deeper meaning. To them, he symbolized the darker side of human nature, the ambition that hides behind masks, the pride that refuses to bow, the sorrow that cloaks itself in silence. His black armor became a metaphor for the hidden struggles of the soul. To face the Black Knight in a tale was to face the unknown self, the part of one's being that could not be easily revealed. And so, he became not just a figure of adventure, but a symbol of the human condition. Yet the common folk still clung to simpler tales. In villages, travelers told of seeing a knight in black armor, riding at dusk along forgotten roads. Sailors spoke of dreams in which a black-clad figure stood upon a shore, warning them before storms. Soldiers returning from campaigns swore that in the smoke of battle, they had glimpsed a faceless knight moving through the chaos, neither friend nor foe, simply present like a shadow born of war. These stories blurred the line between dream and reality, making the Black Knight seem not just a character of books, but a presence that could appear anywhere. What made him especially fascinating in this period was how he came to stand outside of history. Kings had names, armies had banners, explorers had maps, but the Black Knight had none of these. He was nameless, without country, without allegiance. In a time when Europe was expanding, charting, naming, and defining, the Black Knight remained a reminder that not everything could be mapped. Not everything could be known. He represented the limits of knowledge, the persistence of mystery. Artists too embraced him. Painters illustrated romances with images of faceless knights in black armor, their features hidden, their presence commanding. Playwrights wove him into dramas as the rival or the shadowy figure, whose role was never fully explained. Musicians composed ballads in which his deeds were sung, whether as tragic hero or dark enemy. The Black Knight, once a whispered rumor, now stood as a cultural figure appearing in nearly every form of art. Still, even with these creative interpretations, the legend never lost its edge of fear. The faceless knight, dressed in the color of mourning and shadow, always carried unease. To fight him in a story was to confront not only a man, but the possibility that he was something more, something beyond human, something eternal. And for audiences who lived in a world of change, where new discoveries constantly unsettled old certainties, this idea was strangely comforting. If everything else changed, perhaps the Black Knight would remain the same. Thus, by the close of the 16th century, the Black Knight had become both legend and symbol. He was still the mysterious challenger of romance, still the outlaw of folk song, still the allegory of moral tales. But now he was also something greater, a reminder that mystery itself could never be fully banished. Whether seen on a battlefield, sung in a tavern, or printed in a book, he endured timeless, nameless, faceless, forever riding through the imagination of mankind. By the 17th century, when Europe was entering an age of gunpowder, colonization, and growing empires, many believed the knightly age was long gone. Muskets cracked louder than swords, and cavalry gave way to regiments in orderly formations. Yet even as the clamor of firearms replaced the ringing of steel, the legend of the Black Knight refused to fade. Instead, it reshaped itself once more, proving that a figure without identity could survive any transformation of the world. For many, the Black Knight now represented the ghost of a vanished era. In taverns and soldiers' camps, men spoke of him as a spirit of chivalry lingering in a world that had forgotten honor. He rides, they would whisper, because he cannot rest. He rides because the code of knights has died, and he alone remembers it. Two soldiers weary of discipline and powder smoke. This was a haunting but romantic image, a lone rider in black armor, resisting the march of time, standing as the last remnant of a world swallowed by change. But not all saw him as noble. Some writers cast him as the very opposite, not the guardian of a lost code, but the curse of it. To them, the Black Knight symbolized the bloodshed of endless feuds and wars, the futility of noble pride, the darkness hidden in the pageantry of chivalry. In their stories, he was the shadow of every battlefield, a silent reminder that no matter how glorious men claimed war to be, death was always its true master. His armor, they said, was not black by choice, but blackened by centuries of soot and blood. The people, too, continued their own traditions. Folklore adapted him into local tales. In some villages, mothers warned children not to wander after dark lest the Black Knight carry them away. In others, he was seen as a strange protector, a shadow who appeared in times of crisis to guide the lost or shield the innocent. Travelers claimed to see him at crossroads, always motionless until approached, at which point he vanished like smoke. Stories like these blurred into myth, leaving people uncertain was he a curse, a guardian, or something beyond both? One curious feature of this period is how the Black Knight began to take root outside Europe, with explorers and colonists traveling across seas. Their stories went with them in faraway colonies. Strange versions of the Black Knight began to appear. Among settlers in the Americas, whispers spread of a dark horseman seen on misty plains. In ports where sailors gathered, the tale of a faceless knight traveled to foreign ears, who retold it in altered forms, though stripped of medieval trappings. The essence remained, a rider without identity, clothed in black, bound to no master. The legend had become global. At the same time, intellectuals reinterpreted him. Some philosophers of the Enlightenment viewed the Black Knight not as a literal figure, but as an allegory of the unknown, representing all that science had not yet explained. Just as explorers mapped new lands and astronomers charted the heavens, the Black Knight symbolized what lay beyond the edge of knowledge. He was the shadow rider at the border of discovery, reminding mankind that mystery would always remain no matter how far reason advanced. And still, ballads and stage plays carried his presence. Audiences thrilled to stories of duels with the faceless knight, of heroes proving themselves against him, or of kingdoms shaken by his arrival. Each performance rekindled the same unease. What if such a figure truly existed, riding unseen among the living? What if behind the masks of power and progress, the Black Knight still lingered, waiting to step forward when least expected? By the end of this century, the Black Knight was no longer just a medieval curiosity. He was a universal presence, shaping himself into whatever role each age demanded: avenger, ghost, allegory, protector, or curse. His facelessness was his strength, for it allowed every generation to paint its own fears and hopes upon his armor. And so, as Europe moved into modernity, the Black Knight did not fade. He endured, ageless, timeless, unyielding, always riding at the edge of memory and imagination. The 18th century was called the Age of Reason, an era of enlightenment, science, revolutions, and empires that believed themselves destined to banish ignorance forever. Yet through all the brilliance and thunder of this century, the shadow of the Black Knight still lingered. Knights in armor had long since vanished from the battlefield. Castles once alive with banners now lay in ruins or had been converted into estates. Soldiers carried muskets instead of swords, and yet people still whispered of the faceless rider in black who appeared on lonely hills, at storm-lashed coasts, or in the silence of battlefields. Philosophers spoke proudly of light conquering darkness, of knowledge scattering superstition. But ordinary people knew better. They knew that shadows never disappeared. That mystery was as much a part of life as reason, and so the Black Knight endured, reshaped and reimagined, but never erased. Villagers swore that just before storms tore across the land, they saw him riding the horizon, black horse pounding silently across the fields, his visor turned toward the farms that would soon be flattened by rain. Soldiers on the march swore that on nights before bloody clashes they glimpsed a solitary rider, watching them from the ridges, unmoving, untouched by shot or cannon fire, gone when dawn arrived. Sailors returning from voyages across hostile seas whispered that they had seen him too, standing on the edge of cliffs as if carved from the rock itself, unmoved by lightning, unbent by the screaming winds, visor flashing only for a moment before vanishing into mist. To some, he was an omen of death, a sign that doom was near. To others, he was a strange guardian, a presence that appeared when danger approached, a shadow neither friend nor enemy, but eternal watcher of men. In the cities, writers found him irresistible. The new Gothic movement that filled books and poems with haunted ruins, windswept towers, and corridors of echoing stone welcomed the Black Knight into its pages, as though he had been waiting for them all along. He appeared as the adversary without name, the challenger who blocked bridges, the shadow who moved through ruined castles, a presence that unsettled both heroes and readers because he was never explained, never unmasked, never fully defeated. Audiences shivered with delight at his appearance, and the faceless rider became more than a legend of medieval days. He became the very essence of Gothic terror, the symbol of the unknown dressed in armor black as midnight. Painters gave him new life, abandoning images of tournaments and jousts in favor of darker visions, a lone rider beneath twisted oaks, a silhouette against storm clouds rent by lightning, a solitary knight, standing upon shattered battlements as smoke curled around him. He was no longer flesh and blood on these canvases. He was mystery incarnate, the eternal shadow given form by brush and imagination. Philosophers, for all their pride in reason, could not ignore him either, for though they scoffed at superstition, they saw in him a symbol too powerful to dismiss. Some said he was ignorance itself, the last shadow clinging desperately as knowledge spread like light. Others argued differently, insisting that the Black Knight was not ignorance but necessity, that humanity could never live without mystery, that no matter how brightly men lit their lamps, shadows would always remain, and that the faceless night was simply the eternal reminder of the unknown. Soldiers, philosophers, poets, and peasants all saw him in different ways. To revolutionaries, he was faceless resistance, a rider without master standing against tyranny. To kings, he was chaos, rebellion, the spectre that threatened to unseat order. To peasants, he was a figure who haunted the crossroads and forests. To poets, he was allegory, the embodiment of longing, despair, or unanswerable questions. To children, he was a nightmare warning them to return home before darkness fell. He was all these things and none of them, because he had no crest, no name, no banner, no identity. He could be whatever each age demanded of him. Soldiers by firelight told stories of him in hushed tones. Peasants kept his name alive in lullabies that warned the young. Writers and artists filled their works with his image. Philosophers tried to capture his meaning in words, but still he escaped them all. Still he remained faceless, eternal, ungraspable. And by the end of the 18th century, when revolutions toppled kings and empires trembled under the weight of change, when libraries swelled with knowledge, and factories began to darken the skies with smoke, the Black Knight endured. He was no longer merely a medieval figure, no longer confined to jousts or tournaments of old. He had become something larger, a presence outside time itself. He was a relic of the past and yet also a mirror of the present, a figure that showed each age its own fears and desires reflected in his visor. He was the rider at the edge of every road, the shadow at the border of every dream, the unanswered question that no philosopher, no general, no king, and no poet could ever fully defeat. He survived because humanity needs its mysteries, because light itself creates shadow, because in every age of reason there must also be an age of fear. And so he lived on, not as man, not even as ghost, but as an idea, an eternal rider who follows mankind wherever it goes. A presence without name, a face without identity. The 19th and 20th centuries came like roaring storms, bringing machines, railways, telegraphs, engines, wars of scale unimaginable. And finally an age where men walked upon the moon and peered into galaxies beyond their own. And yet through every advance, through every proclamation that mystery was finished, that superstition was gone. The shadow of the Black Knight followed humanity as faithfully as night follows day. For legends are not chained to centuries and myths do not wither with time. They grow with those who tell them. Reshaped but eternal, reborn in every generation, and so the faceless rider lived on. In the 19th century, when romantic poets stood gazing at ruins and shuddering at storms, they saw in the Black Knight not simply a warrior, but the embodiment of the sublime, that mixture of awe and terror that shook the human soul when confronted by forces larger than itself, and so he became a figure in verse, painted in words as a rider of midnight storms, faceless not because he lacked identity, but because he carried the identity of all mystery itself. Painters of the Gothic revival placed him in canvases where ruined abbeys stood against brooding skies, where forests swallowed roads, where moonlight bled through cloud, and made his black armor glisten with impossible light, and audiences starved for tales of mystery amid an increasingly industrial age. Embraced him as a figure that kept the world from becoming too explainable, too mechanical, too ordinary. When the Industrial Revolution turned cities into furnaces of smoke and iron, when locomotives howled like demons across the night, when men spoke of progress as though nothing could resist its march, still people whispered of a knight who appeared on the edges of fields, who rode silently across the moors, who haunted crossroads and graveyards, who lingered where death was near. And in those whispers he was both a comfort and a terror, for he proved that even in an age of machines, mystery endured. By the 20th century, as the world was split by two great wars, as tanks rolled where horses once charged, as machine guns rattled where lances once struck, the Black Knight appeared again, not in armor upon a battlefield, but in stories told by soldiers who swore that before a battle, or in the smoke of no man's land, they glimpsed a figure moving slowly, untouched by shells, unmoved by fire, present only for a heartbeat before vanishing into the chaos. Some believed he was death itself, walking among men to claim his due. Others believed he was a protector, a shadow watching silently to guide those fated to survive. In the trenches, in foxholes, in bombed cities, The idea of the faceless night gave shape to the unspeakable, the fear of dying unseen, the knowledge that the world still contained forces greater than even the most advanced weapons. And when the wars ended, when peace returned in fractured pieces, the night did not vanish. For in the quiet after horror, in the nights of remembrance, in the monuments of stone and fields of graves, people still felt him near, as though history itself had given him new strength. The modern age, with its films, its novels, its endless hunger for heroes and villains, embraced him with fresh vigor, and soon the Black Knight was not only a figure of folklore, but a character of fiction, of comic books, of cinema, appearing in forms both noble and sinister, sometimes as cursed guardian, sometimes as villainous spectre, sometimes as misunderstood wanderer whose face was never seen. Each retelling gave him new armor, new purpose, but always the same essence, the faceless shadow upon the road. In psychology, scholars began to interpret him not as a literal ghost or warrior, but as an archetype of the human mind, the dark rider that lives in every imagination, the embodiment of uncertainty, the symbol of the unknown future, the silent presence that reminds humanity of its own fears and its own unending quest for answers. In science too, he appeared indirectly, for when astronomers discovered strange signals from space, some claimed the term Black Knight for a mysterious satellite said to orbit the Earth, a myth that merged technology with legend, showing how deeply the archetype had penetrated culture, how quickly humanity cloaked the unexplained in the armor of myth. Through all of this, the question lingered: was there ever truly a Black Knight? Was he once a real warrior who lived, fought, and died, his name forgotten but his shadow immortalized by rumor? Or was he never flesh at all, only an invention born from fear, a story told to explain the unexplainable, to give form to death, to uncertainty, to the silent moments when men felt watched by something they could not see? Historians scoured chronicles for evidence, and though some accounts mention faceless challengers or mysterious knights who appeared in tournaments without name or crest, no proof has ever survived. Nothing to anchor the legend in reality, and yet the very absence of proof is part of his endurance. For what is a mystery explained, but a story ended, and humanity never truly wishes its best? Stories to end, and so the Black Knight rides on, not bound to one country, one century, or one battlefield, but carried in whispers, in pages, in brushstrokes, in film reels, in late-night conversations where someone insists they saw something at the roadside, a figure in black, silent, watching, there for only a moment before it was gone. Legends live not because they are proven, but because they are needed, and the Black Knight, faceless, nameless, timeless, is needed still. He is the presence that reminds us that even in the age of satellites and screens, mystery is not dead, that beyond the reach of light, beyond the edge of knowledge, shadows still wait. He is not the knight of tournaments, not the warrior of flesh and steel, but the eternal shadow riding with mankind, the unanswered question, the unending story, the silence that follows every step of history. And as long as there are storms to darken horizons, battles to be fought, dreams to unsettle, and mysteries to be whispered, the Black Knight will remain, riding silently through the centuries. Faceless, nameless, endless, a legend stronger than reality itself. A rider who belongs to no past and no future, but to all time, forever following, forever waiting, forever reminding us that the truth of the Black Knight is not whether he was real, but that we still see him when we close our eyes, still hear his horse upon the road when the night is deep, still feel his gaze when the world grows dark, for some legends are too vast to die, and the Black Knight is one of them.